I guess
There's like a book today.
Gary was copying.
he was working, huh?
Yeah.
Gary was hard at work.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome.
He gives us the homework too.
I know, they're great. All right, okay, looks like no one else is coming in, so this might be it. Okay, so Matthew chapters 15 and 16. Some really, really good stuff here. As always in Matthew, we get ties back to the Old Testament. We get the idea that he doesn't like the Pharisees and the Sadducees or any of the Jewish leaders. And it comes through pretty clear. Right away, in the first couple verses, we see a really big problem. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they butt heads with Jesus. Why is it a problem that the disciples didn't wash their hands? We teach our kids to do that.
They had COVID. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I had to say it.
Why? Well, why was it a big issue? Shouldn't they wash their hands?
Did they have water available?
Pardon?
Did they have water available?
Yeah, oh yeah, they had water. It's probably muddy and murky and full of typhoid, but yeah, they had water. So, but why is it a problem?
It was part of their tradition.
Right, it was part of their tradition, and not only did they persecute people, they held it against them. To them it was a sin because they made up this rule. So hygienically it was a good thing that you should wash your hands before you eat, but back then nobody did it except for the Pharisees and the Sadducees who made it a law. So
How do you know they didn't?
well, we don't, except what the commentators tell us. But it's, I don't know, good question, Gene, but it's just what the commentators tell us, that it wasn't a normal practice. But it was a normal practice for Jewish people before they went into the temple to wash. And that was to make sure that they were pure before God. But to wash their hands before they eat, it was just a law that was created by the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Now, it wasn't one of the purity rituals, because the purity rituals we get in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 11. And remember, anybody that had a discharge, bloody discharge, semen, or pus from a sore, they had to wash themselves and then leave the camp for the night, and then they'd come back and be clean.
Except women. They had to leave for a lot longer.
Okay, does anybody remember how long?
Was it 2 weeks?
7 days.
7 days.
7 days. Or was it 2 weeks? I think you might be right.
Well, because once it ended, you still had to wait. You
Yep,
couldn't.
I think you're right. I think it was twice as long for the women as it was for the men.
Right.
You're right.
Right. So it was unfair.
Yep.
Right.
Trivia question.
Yeah.
Verse 15 says, approached by Pharisees from Jerusalem. Where was Jesus at? Was he around the Sea of Galilee?
Yep, he's around the Sea of Galilee, and they wanted, Matthew was specific that the leaders came from Jerusalem because that's where the temple was at. So he wanted us to know that these were the top dogs. Because usually, at that time, each synagogue had traveling rabbis. They didn't have their own, except in Jerusalem, the big temple, they had their own, and those were the really, really top guys, the good teachers. So, Jesus is saying, you guys hold these laws over people's heads because you just make them up. You just make them up. And then he gets into another problem. in verses 3 through 6. Oh, hey, Donna Joe, good news that Don came back home.
Your speaker's off.
Oh, that's okay, but hopefully,
Thank you very much for all the prayers. He is home and he's feeling much better.
Good.
excellent.
Long 2 weeks, I'll say that.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
So thanks for the prayers, appreciate it.
You betcha. Okay, so, and praying for Don, we're honoring somebody's father and mother, so we're honoring Don.
Good. Ah,
So, but I digress. So, honor your father and mother, and of course, Jesus is talking about the fifth commandment from Exodus. And that, of course, is a law from God, so that should take precedence over everything else. But the Jewish leaders, they came up with a new law that said if the kids set aside some of their money for the temple, then they don't have to give it to their parents. And that's what Jesus is talking about here.
how did the kids get the money?
Well, it could be their inheritance, or it could be, maybe they did well out in the market, in the Trump years, everybody's 401k plan did very well, so same thing happened to these kids. They did well in the market, or maybe they had a good crop,
Okay.
okay? So they had a good crop, and they have a lot of money, and they're just letting their parents get destitute. And they could do this under the laws of the Pharisees by saying, I'm going to give so much to temple. But they didn't really give it to temple. They just kind of held on to it. So Jesus is saying this is a bad thing that you're allowing these people to do. And that's the law of Corban, Corban. And it's in your footnotes. And like it says in the footnotes, people would use this Corban to hide money from their parents and not take care of their parents.
That's pretty bad.
Awful. So because and Jesus says they are not to honor their father and mother with it because of Corban. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition, keeping the temple up and running by allowing these kids to hide the money away. You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. And in verse 8 and 9, Jesus repeats what Isaiah said. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain, and their teachings are merely human rules. So Isaiah was looking forward in the future when he knew that this would happen. And can't wait till we get to Isaiah. It'll be a good book. You guys will love it. So Jesus called the crowd to him. Now, in the Gospels, whenever you hear crowd, they're talking about the Jewish people. Okay? When they're talking about, like John will say the Jews, and when John says Jews, he's talking specifically about the leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He's not talking about the people. So back in the day, people would use the book of John to say that all Jews were bad because it's in the Bible. But that's not what John was doing. John was only talking about the leaders, not the people. So be very careful when we see crowd. That means all the Jewish people. When we see Jews in John, he's talking just about the leaders.
And how many are in a crowd, would you say?
More than two.
Oh, okay.
But knowing Jesus and the people that followed him, there's probably 100,000, because by this time people knew that Jesus could cure people.
Okay.
So as we see in the scriptures, they cut holes in roofs, they drop people down through the roof, they've got crowds of people, 4,000 men plus their women and kids, 5,000 in another instance. So Jesus has a lot of people following him.
Okay.
And then in verses 10 and 11, Jesus gets to what makes somebody defiled. Now, of course, in Leviticus, we saw the different foods we couldn't eat. You can't eat shellfish. You can't have a cheeseburger because that would mix dairy and beef. You can't wear clothes that are silk and cotton or whatever, blended fabric. So they had, once again, they made up some of these rules. Some of them were good because they kept them healthy. Like you shouldn't eat pork because probably they ate a lot of raw foods. Shellfish, I don't know what happens if you eat raw shellfish. Sushi seems to be okay.
Yeah,
So-
but not all shellfish is good.
No. So who knows? But anyway, Jesus tells them, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them. But what comes out of their mouth, that's what defiles them. So Jesus says, don't tell lies, don't speak poorly about your neighbor. And we see this again in Acts chapter 10, verses 9 through 16, where God tells Peter, if I made it, you can eat it. And of course, Peter had a lot of trouble with that because Peter was a devout Jew. He was raised his whole life that he couldn't eat this. But in Acts chapter 10, God shows him 3 times the stuff that he could eat. And Leviticus, of course, gives us the list of everything he can't eat. Okay. So do you guys see how Jesus could be causing a lot of trouble for himself in these first couple verses?
Well, he's going up against the Pharisees, who are in the Sadducees, right?
Uh-huh.
And he's making waves on
Yeah.
things that they say.
Right. He's disagreeing with them and they don't like being disagreed.
That's right. That's
right. So,
These guys look at Jesus and they say, he's going to cost us our jobs. And Jesus is confusing all the Jewish people too, because they've been trained all along. They go to temple and they hear what they shouldn't do, and here comes Jesus saying, no, it's not the way it works. Not the way it works. And in verse 14, he makes it really clear. He says, leave them, they are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. So Jesus is really, really getting himself in trouble. And of course, you've got Peter in verse 15, always honest. He says, explain the parable to us, but at least he asked. You know, the other disciples are just going to go along and be happy and be dense. And in verse 16, Jesus says, are you still so dull? Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of the person's mouth come from the heart. And these are the things that defile them. Because Jesus is saying, you got to be careful about what you say.
words hurt.
Words hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's no doubt about that. That's why Jesus' brother James said, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. When we do that, life's a lot better. For out, in verse 19, for out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. So Jesus is really, really getting into trouble. Okay.
Can everyone hear you now?
Can you guys hear everything?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, good. And we can hear you, so we are blessed. Now, we're coming into a really tough part of Scripture here. Pardon?
Who was that?
Jeanette disappeared.
You can't hear him?
I can hear, I'm fine. I don't know what that sound was.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay,
Well,
so...
Richard's picture came up when it happened, so I don't know.
Oh,
Whose picture?
Richard.
Oh. Okay.
He's in the car driving.
Is he?
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's why he just has his name up. So maybe someone honked at him. So
And he rolls down the window and shouts back, shut up, I'm listening to a Bible study.
yeah, really.
Okay, so did anybody have a lot of trouble with the next section? Does this sound like Jesus?
No, I had problem with it.
I do every time.
I didn't read it.
Every time I have trouble with this. And thankfully, Gary gave us these great maps. So when you look at the maps, you can see where Jesus is now. And that's why I love these maps, because we get to walk alongside Jesus. And he's in the region of Tyre and Sidon. So if you look at your map, it's going to be on the left-hand side, near the top, on both maps, I think.
Okay.
Got it? Okay, so that's where he's at. And that's a Gentile area. Okay? So they left that place in verse 21. So they left the place of the Jewish people, because they just left the Jewish leaders and all the Jewish people. And leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now, once again, we see these words. Jesus withdrew. Matthew does that on the table.
Hello.
How are you?
It's pretty good. It's been a crazy day, though.
Yes, it has.
This is it? Okay, good.
Yep, you can add that to your book.
Great.
So, Matthew uses the words Jesus withdrew a lot. And that tells us that Jesus is leaving the Jewish leaders because he doesn't want to get into more trouble. He's avoiding confrontation. So this is the peacekeeping Jesus. He doesn't do it because he's a coward. Just now is not the time for him to confront the leaders straight on.
He has too much work to do yet.
He's got a ton of work to do yet. So watch out for those words. He withdrew. So he leaves the area of the Jewish people to go into the region of Tyre and Sidon, the Gentile area. And Jesus did this so he could bring the gospel to all people. Even though what we see in the next couple verses doesn't look like it, that's what he's there for. So, and we know that this has been God's plan forever, because in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, God tells Abraham, he says, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So God's telling Abraham, you're going to be the first of the Jewish people to bring the gospel to everybody. So it's always been God's plan that this should happen. And to prove the point that salvation is made available to all, Jesus is in Gentile country right now, even though the instructions he gave to the disciples in chapter 10, where he told them, don't go there. He told them, don't go there because it's not time yet. Because the gospel was supposed to be given to the Jewish people first, and then the Gentiles. But it would get to everybody sooner or later. Okay, so he's in Gentile country, and this woman comes up to him, a Canaanite, so she's not Jewish, and she says, Lord, son of David, so she knows who Jesus is, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly. And Jesus totally ignores her, doesn't say a thing, which was normal for Jewish men. Jewish men would hardly talk to a Jewish woman, and to a Gentile, they had nothing to do with them. Didn't want to talk to him at all.
How did she have insight to know that he was the son of David and Lord?
I believe.
Gentile.
My impression, Gary, is that news travels fast, that she heard what Jesus did, she sees the miracles, and God has a way of revealing to certain people the truth. So even though she's not Jewish, even though she's not to be saved yet under somebody's ideas, God revealed to her that this is the person you need to go to. Just like God, when we invite people to church or we give our testimony, some people don't hear it. It's not their time. It hasn't been revealed to them. So I believe, Gary, that God revealed to this woman that here's your chance. Here's your chance for salvation. And of course, when her daughter gets healed, it glorifies God. So that's his purpose too. So the disciples say, get rid of this woman. She's nothing but trouble. She's just whining. She keeps crying out. Just get rid of her. And Jesus answers, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Once again, Israel first, and then the Gentiles. The woman came and knelt before
I have a
him.
question.
Pardon?
Do you think Jesus was just voicing the cultural norms and testing her faith? Because he turns right around and puts her in perspective right after.
Yep.
Perhaps he was testing her faith and mirroring all the cultural norms and opinions around him.
Yep. He's looking for persistence. Because when we persist in prayer, sometimes that's when it's granted. When we keep going and going and going. Some other commentaries have harsher opinions. I prove to believe that Jesus was testing her and saying, if you really want it, you got to keep asking. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs.
I did have one more real fast question.
Yeah.
Since we were talking about my driving, is it unchristian of me not to let anyone pass me while I'm in Bible?
Is that Rich talking?
Yeah, he's on his
He's
phone.
driving somewhere.
Yeah, he's on the
Or
highway.
am
It just
I
doesn't
in the
sound
right
like
because
him.
I'm in Bible study?
Well, Rich, I think Jesus said it. Jesus said it best. You know, the first will be last. So wherever you're going, buddy, you're gonna be late. All right. So
So then I am in support and trying to get car okay.
okay.
So I'll definitely be late wherever I'm going.
All right. So Jesus says it's not right to toss the children's bread and give it to the dogs. Now, that's how Jewish people referred to Gentiles.
Oh.
That's just what they did.
The dogs were the Gentiles are the dogs?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
They had
So
they had no high esteem for them.
no, they did not.
Boy, oh boy.
Yeah.
Talk about snobs.
Well, you think about the words we use sometimes. Well, not now that we're saved, but back in the day, the nasty things we would say about people.
Oh yeah, that's
You know,
true.
When you're growing up in Chicago, you know everybody's a Polak, a Wop, or
Oh
a
my
Kraut.
gosh.
You know.
Or when you're driving a car. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank God Christy's saved. Woo!